video, I want to show why I like the Back Door Roth contribution so much and why I often refer to it as one of the most powerful wealth building strategies you can take advantage of. So if you have the cash flow to support it, this is going to show you pretty quickly what exactly you're missing out on. So the maximum contribution you can make if you're under the age of 50 in 2020 is $6,000. So let's assume this is the first contribution you're ever going to make, and in this case, we'll throw on a very reasonable 8% return associated with that money. Now remember, with the IRAs, typically you're not going to be tapping into that money ideally until at least the age of 59 and a half. So let's say in this example, you're early to mid 30s, you're starting to make some money, and you have $6,000 of cash flow that can be allocated towards an IRA. So let's just assume you got 30 years worth of growth leading into your early to mid 60s. Now in this case, we're going to be looking at the $6,000 per year. That typically gets adjusted with inflation, so those contribution limits actually may increase. So if anything, we might be undershooting the probability of this in the long term. But nonetheless, it'll show you the point. So that's a large number that just about anyone I typically talk to says, yeah, I'd be interested in having that completely tax-free sitting in my account as a nest egg when I'm getting close towards the opportunity of either retiring or making work optional. So $6,000 initially, when I say it to people, may not sound like a completely life-changing number. That's the amazing thing about the effects of compounding when it comes to finance. But $6,000 per year over 30 years at an 8% return really can add up significantly. So you can see here, you're close to $750,000 completely tax-free. So that's why it's so important. Now we're going to talk about what goes into the actual process. I'm Rick Vazza, president of Driven Wealth Management, and what we're going to walk through now is the actual Backdoor Roth contribution. It can be detailed, so if you'd like the full walkthrough of this, go ahead and click the link. There's a webinar that's going to go through the ins and outs. I'm going to keep this intentionally fairly high level for the sake of the YouTube. If you want to see the actual walkthrough, go ahead, click the free webinar. I'm going to ask you for your email so I can follow up with you with some good information. But in the meantime, you're going to get some nice valuable content right here as well. So what exactly is a Roth IRA? I think that's typically a great starting point, and just explaining how this thing works. So with the Roth IRA, you are able, as I mentioned, to make a contribution of $6,000 per year if you're under the age of 50 for 2020. And what that's going to allow you to do is basically have no tax benefit up front, but when you invest those funds, that money can all grow tax-free. And assuming you meet certain qualifications, again, kind of 59 and a half is a big threshold there. When you take that money out, completely tax-free distribution. So it can be very, very powerful. Now that $6,000 can be opened at just about any major institution. So those are your Fidelities, the Vanguards, even Robinhood, I think, has them now. So it's pretty much anywhere where you can open that account, fund it, and then ultimately invest into the account. And what you're going to pick from an investment standpoint, that's really, a lot of things that I help clients with is figuring out what that investment mix should look like. But ultimately at any of those institutions, it's kind of limitless as far as the options go, and that can kind of be a pro or a con. But you have a lot of different things to choose from. Now, the idea here, though, a couple of things that you need to watch out for why the back door is so important. So there are contribution limits as far as your income goes. So what happens there is if you are over a certain threshold as far as the income amount, you cannot contribute directly into the IRA, the Roth IRA in particular. So what you then need to be mindful of is if you're over that threshold, a lot of people just think initially, game over, I can't move forward with this strategy. But what they're not aware of is there's actually a way of making what's called a non-deductible contribution. So that's a non-deductible contribution into a regular, or what's called a traditional IRA. And that does require some administrative oversight. That's the part I walk through in the webinar in detail. But just suffice to say that you can make a non-deductible contribution and then convert it over to a Roth. And so that's kind of when you say backdoor, that's why, because you're kind of backdooring your way into the Roth by going from that non-deductible IRA contribution and then converting into Roth. So a lot of people that I meet with when they're high income, and we're talking high income, I'll put the actual link to the IRS limit in the show notes. But typically think if you're 100,000 or more, that's kind of where you're starting to get into that threshold where you need to pay attention if you're actually going to qualify. But they often think, hey, I make too much money, I can't take advantage of this fantastic strategy. Well, you can, but there's some important key nuggets that you need to know. Again, I'm going to talk more about the details in the webinar. There's also some walls of separation between pre-tax money and after-tax money that I'm going to cover in that webinar as well. But suffice to say, there are ways you can implement it. And as I mentioned, the numbers are significant. So if you can take advantage of it, it can truly be one of those life-changing actions that you take on a year-over-year basis. So I hope this at least gives you some helpful context around how and what this process is. Again, if you'd like to learn more and dive into the full kind of walkthrough, I hope you'll join me in the webinar, and I'll look forward to seeing you in there.